A couple of disclaimers going into this. I was directly requested to look at this game by an individual who's involved with it. We had a very brief conversation and I said I'll check it out at some point. About 2.5 months later, here I am. I think I've made it clear with my reviews that whenever I get a game for free or I'm otherwise in contact with the development team or something, I try my best not to let that influence my decision in any way. That being said, it's always important to disclose conflict of interest, which was the purpose of this introduction. Secondly, the game is still under development and nowhere near complete. The current version, which I played, is version 1.1.0.3. So, depending on what changes down the line, this video can very easily become obsolete. Okay, with that out of the way, Roseblight has a setting and storytelling approach that feels a little similar to something like Earthbound. Everything takes place in a relatively normal, modern-day human civilization, but there are more than a few things that just feel off. And I'm not just referring to all the monsters in the wilderness. It's a style that I love, and I don't often find games that manage to pull it off effectively, and certainly not this well. There's also a surprising amount of cursing and violence. It definitely comes out of nowhere considering how light and carefree the presentation was moments ago, but it does happen early enough, and it does a good job at setting this tone of a balance between friendly and hostile. Much of the story revolves around the main character dealing with an inner demon, in very much a Jekyll and Hyde sort of style. I didn't like it initially, certainly not the way that it was introduced, but it quickly grew on me. The writing in the game's overall presentation is pretty good. It's just really weird. Characters come off as having odd motivations or otherwise unexplained motivations, and they'll suddenly turn their attitude around on a dime. But I'm not gonna say that it doesn't work. I don't know how, but Roseblight manages to pull it off. I think a big part of the reason why are all the quirky but well-written characters, and the pacing moves along very nicely. It doesn't drag its feet or rush too quickly, it's just right. As for the gameplay, here's where things start to feel a little bit more muddled. The best way I can describe it is kind of like a top-down Parasite Eve or Vagrant story. Kind of, but not quite either. The entire game can be played like a more traditional action RPG, however, the aggressive enemies make it very difficult to deal with more than one at once. This is where the tactics mode comes into play. With the press of the button, the world enters a state of real-time pause. Enemies will only move and take actions when you do. If you've played Superhot, for example, then you'll have an idea of what I'm talking about. Actions can only be performed up until the player runs out of stamina, at which point the tactics mode needs to be exited to allow stamina to recover. Rinse and repeat, and that's the game. There's a decent amount of variety at the player's disposal, such as a watering can that temporarily lowers the enemy stats, and a few different ranged attacks, all of which take up different amounts of stamina, so there's some good balancing there to keep the game interesting. This is all complemented by a town and larger overworld to explore, side quests to accomplish, and puzzles to solve. So the whole thing is a pretty well put together package. The player stats are influenced mainly by their equipment purchased from shops, as well as accessories that can be found and crafted in the world. Obtaining new abilities and attacks, such as being able to jump, are unlocked by advancing through the story, so there's a good sense of progression and pacing to the game. The two major problems I have are that the game is way too easy and also way too chaotic. With the tactics mode enabled, dealing with enemies and dodging their attacks is a little bit brain dead. Sure, I have to exit tactics mode to allow my stamina to recover, but I can easily just walk away. In fact, since Tactics Mode has no bearing on stamina, I can abuse it, turning it on and off, to easily dodge enemy attacks whenever I want and without any real punishment. Granted, I didn't play on the highest difficulty, I played on Sharpened instead of Painful, but I don't expect the core gameplay to change. The other aspect that bothers me is that of the party system. The game works well enough with one character, but I'm not so sure about two or more. Environments are much too compact, and the character graphics are too large to comfortably fit everyone on screen. The player can direct individual party members to attack specific enemies, but they'll just blindly rush in there and get themselves killed. What I find much more interesting is being able to switch between playable characters at any time, each one with their own strengths, weaknesses, and abilities. And I can see the game working out better with this as the focus, but I don't know about the whole simultaneous party setup. I think the maps need to be a lot more open for that to work. Granted, I didn't spend a ton of time with this game, just enough to see the credits, and I messed around a little bit afterwards. But here are my suggestions. Tactics Mode should not be free. It should have some kind of cost associated with it. Maybe, for example, let's say actions normally don't cost any stamina at all. You can sprint and attack to your heart's content. However, instead, simply moving and attacking while Tactics Mode is open does drain stamina. This keeps Tactics Mode very powerful. It can be used to safely deal a lot of damage quickly, or to dodge more difficult enemy attacks, but it prevents the player from abusing it. By the same token, standing still in Tactics Mode can still allow the player to get a lay of the land and direct the other party members. However, on that note, I can't imagine that the game is going to work out well with the full party. I think that maybe it barely works with 2 characters, but with 3 or 4, I can only see it being a mess. I think it would be a lot better to simply have one character on the field at a time and have the players swap between them whenever they wish, as opposed to having several characters on the field at a time and allowing the AI to utilize them. I'm not saying that that can't work, I'm just not sure that I can see how. At least not without drastically opening up the map some more. Whatever the developer wishes to do, I hope they will find nothing but success. The main focus of the game is definitely on the writing, characters, atmosphere, and the general presentation. And in that sense, they've got it going in spades. It's also worth noting that, apparently, the entire game, from the art to the music to the programming to the writing and so on, is entirely handled by one guy. That alone makes this pretty special, especially considering the overall high quality. Of course, that also means that development will inevitably be very slow. That reminds me a fair bit of Iconoclast, which took nearly a decade to finally release. Well, anyway, I do suggest that people check out Roseblight. It's free as long as you have Windows, it plays reasonably well with a controller. You'll need to download a program like Joy2Key since it doesn't have native controller support, but that's fine, it's not a big deal for an early demo. The game's pretty cool, and I'm interested in seeing how it might end up in the full release. Thanks for watching.